Mark, who's getting the blame back in Manchester?
Well, there is. I think patience is beginning to run out with Ten Hag. That seems to be what I'm picking up. That I think the fans are beginning to tire a little bit of the excuses, I guess, and the same old answers. Now, the answer he gave then about that, I don't like this team having 99% effort. We should be trying hard on that. That sort of thing can come from a manager when he's been at a club for 3 months, 6 weeks maybe, when he's just inherited a squad that he's picked up from another manager. But he's had this squad now for 2 seasons, and we're into a third season, so that's his team. So his team should not be in a situation now where they're not giving their all. And I was at the game last night, and they were really poor. I mean, I won't say it was a lack of effort. I think it was a lack of quality. I think the way that, this goal here is kind of comical, really. It was just a big mistake by Eriksson, and the way that the defender ran through the team. But for me, United just look like a team that don't look 100% fit. The players seem to be struggling to get through games, certainly the last half an hour. And the players up front that Ten Hag has chosen are not good enough. They're just not good enough for a club of Man United's stature. They're not putting teams away. So opponents are knowing that they can take on Man United because they're not going to get hurt. But that's down to him. He knows the players. He's got the tactics. He's been there long enough now to know which players work, which players don't work, and which players are fit and which players aren't fit, and why they're not fit. So it's on him, and I think that's why the fans are now beginning to not turn. I think there's still there's a group of United fans who will back the manager no matter what. I'm not quite sure why, when the evidence is fairly obvious that it's not working. But that's the reality.
Mark, why was that press conference that we just heard from early?
Well, I've been given two reasons. Now, first of all, United players do tend to get some Fridays off. If they have a Sunday game, they get a Friday off. Now, there is a lot of construction work going on at the training ground as well. So one of the reasons given is that they couldn't accommodate the press conference on a Friday because there's so much work at the training ground. But either way, it was 5 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. So in terms of like winning friends and influencing people, getting people to turn up at a training ground on the outskirts of Manchester at 5 o'clock on a Thursday is a bit unusual. So, but that's his choice. That he's allowed to pick it whenever he wants. But a Friday press conference with players training would be the obvious way to do it, I'd imagine.
Stevie, you're pulling some faces on Erik ten Hag's quote, the second of them there.
He is an absolute master of creating problems for himself. Why would you come out and say that it was because of the effort that there was a problem? I mean, all he's got to do is say, going forward, we weren't good enough. Or we gave the ball away too much. We're making too many mistakes. Then everybody's just going to agree with him because that was the problem. I certainly watched the whole of this game and never once thought to myself, there's a lack of effort here. They just weren't very good. Now, if he comes out and says those things, he's not going to get... I mean, how can you come out and say they didn't give enough, they weren't trying hard enough? I mean, he's just creating... I mean, you see how horrible was that first question? That's from the get-go. And then he starts talking. And then by the end of it, I have no idea what he's talking about. He threw in, we've turned the corner. But if you'd turned the corner, you wouldn't be talking about how they never gave enough effort. I mean, it's just... It makes no sense every time he sits down and talks to people. But really, half of it, yeah, it's a horrible performance. They were still a better team than Twente, by the way. I mean, let's be honest. They were a better team than Twente. They're just on the field, they're not good enough. But when you just make it worse for yourself by coming out and telling people that they weren't trying hard enough, I mean, seriously.
Do you echo? Go on, Mark.
Okay. I mean, to be fair to Ten Hag, just to give him his due, I have been told that people at United have said to him, look, you need to be a little less blunt, a little less direct. You need to kind of soften your language, soften your approach a little bit. But he clearly isn't still fluent in English, and whether that's because he's not been able to pick up the languages, as well as maybe Arne Slot. Arne Slot is obviously he's much more fluent in English. And I think you can see that the way he has a press conference, the way he talks to his players, Slot is much more comfortable speaking in English, even though Erik ten Hag has been at the club for 2 years. He isn't comfortable in English. His press conferences aren't as fluent as other coaches, and that is an issue. That is an issue that people at United have picked up on, that his language can be very blunt. And people say he's Dutch, but yes, he's Dutch. But, the Dutch people do know how to temper a message sometimes. Erik ten Hag is just, there's no filter. He's too honest, and I think that's the problem.
The thing is, Oggy, again, I understand what you're saying, and I kind of get what you're saying. But when you're coming out with that language, whether it's in Dutch or whether it's in English, that is the wrong thing to say. You're putting yourself
Absolutely.
under pressure. Does that not? I mean, listen, there's no question that I'm assuming, because every single one of us that's got a press conference will sit and think about it before you go. I would assume he does that. And I would certainly hope that either one of his coaches or the press officer or somebody would sort of steer him and help him and have a conversation, not just go in all guns blazing and sit and just... I mean, you're throwing your players under the bus. He's thrown them all under the bus, every single one of them that stepped on the field. So, whether it's English or Dutch, listen, this guy's been around long enough to know better.
I'll be honest, I've played with a number of Dutch players over the years, and all of their English was better than mine. I am yet to meet somebody from the Netherlands that didn't have a perfect command of the language. That being said, and I didn't think keeping on Erik ten Hag was the right decision to make, even after they won the FA Cup. I maintain that to this day. But the more I see his press conferences, the more I'm just starting to feel sorry for Erik ten Hag. How many, and especially given a club like Manchester United, with somebody like Oggy breathing down your neck every day. how many?
Giving him the death stare.
Yeah. How many ways can you say, God, we were awful? He's just run out of ways to say it. And I just think Erik ten Hag's feelings as a manager have been evident for far too long. And until he's put out of his misery at this point, it's just going to be that, say, some other excuse, some other way to say we're just not very good, and I can't figure this out. How many corners is he going to turn, to Stevie's point? I mean, as I say, I am just feeling a little sorry for him now.
They are slight favourites at the weekend over Spurs. How do you see it playing out, Oggy?
That is a tough one to call. I mean, I don't know why they're favourites, because I just don't see United scoring goals against a team that's got a remotely good defence. So whether Tottenham got the defence to keep them out, I don't know. But United are really poor going forward. They don't score enough goals. So I favour Tottenham, because I think Tottenham have got more going forward. And this is the start of... I mean, listen, we've had this a lot with United, and I must have written Ten Hag off 5 or 6 times in the last 12 months, but this is a really big week now, because they've drawn 2 on the bounce. They've got 3 massive games next week. Tottenham at home, Porto away in the Europa League, which is a tough game. No matter when you go to Porto, that's a tough game. And then Aston Villa away. Aston Villa away on the last game before the international break. If they don't win any of those games next week, and they could lose all, they could draw all, they might get a win. I mean, if they don't win a game, that's 5 games without a win going into an international break, and they're not playing well. He is beginning to look like he's on borrowed time tonight, because the performances are poor, the results are poor, the signings have been average, and like the guys say, he's not communicating very well. He's not talking himself out of a problem. He's talking himself into one, as Stevie said. So I don't quite know what the positives are right now with Erik ten Hag. You know, it's really hard to... Look, even the players that have been injured are coming back, and they're not making much of a difference. So he does need to get some results very quickly.
Oggy, can I ask you, was it you that said the Van Nistelrooy appointment was more to do with... if they decided early on that they would get rid of him, that he could step in?
Yeah. See, that's one thing that I heard in the summer, that Ten Hag was basically told to reorganise his backroom staff. So his long-term assistant, Mitchell van der Gaag, left the club. They brought in René Hake, and they brought in Ruud van Nistelrooy. Now, there's not really a connection between Van Nistelrooy and Ten Hag, but Van Nistelrooy's come in, and one issue that United had last season was that if Ten Hag was to have gone last season, there was obviously points in the season where he could have gone. You know, there were some pretty bad results. There was nobody at the club that could have stepped in. They couldn't give it to Steve McLaren, because obviously, you know, Steve's reputation is a little bit tarnished in England now because of what happened with England. And there was nothing beyond that. They're looking at Darren Fletcher, who, you know, Darren Fletcher's not a coach. So with Van Nistelrooy, at least they've got a guy who has got some experience. He's managed, albeit for, I think, 12 months in Holland. So, and he's a guy that the fans would buy into. The only problem with that is, as we know, as we've heard from him today, is that that's exactly the same route that took with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, and that didn't work out. So you can go down the old legend path a few too many times. But he is somebody there that could certainly act as an interim coach until they found somebody to take on the job permanently if they do change Ten Hag.